Our scripture reading this morning is poetry from the Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verses 1 through 13. I am a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valleys. As a lily among brambles, so is my love among maidens. As an apple tree among the trees of the wood, so is my beloved among young men. With great delight I sat in his shadow, and his fruit was sweet to my taste. He brought me to the banqueting house, and his intention toward me was love. Sustain me with raisins, refresh me with apples, for I am faint with love. Oh, that his left hand were under my head, and that his right hand embrace me, I adjure you. O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or the wild doves, do not stir up or awaken love until it is ready. The voice of my beloved, look, he comes, leaping upon the mountains, bounding over the hills. My beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. Look, there he stands behind our wall, gazing in at the windows, looking through the lattice. My beloved speaks and says to me, arise, my love, my fair one, and come away. For now the winter is past, the rain is over and gone, the flowers appear on the earth. The time of singing has come, and the voice of the turtle dove is heard in our land. The fig tree puts forth its figs, and the vines are in blossom. They give forth fragrance. Arise, my love, my fair one, and come away.
You may have noticed that our scripture today described the woman as a rose, has the man looking in through the lattice, inviting her to steal away from everything. William Shakespeare is a total thief. Yes, I said it. Stole it straight from scripture. That whole balcony scene of Romeo and Juliet, a rose by any other name, whatever. It was in Song of Solomon before Willie ever took it. Love stories and the passion that goes with them. We had a quote from one of our Thursday night conversations a few weeks ago. Someone said, we've talked more about sex at church than I've ever heard about in my home. This quote made many of us laugh, but it also reminded us how important it is to have a safe place to talk about love, relationships. Also, it reminded me how much guilt the church has placed on issues of relationship and sexuality. It reminded us how insecure we can become when the conversation moves from romance to intimacy. There's a few topics in the church that always feel like they're off bounds, out of bounds for polite conversation. Spirituality, sexuality, and emotional health. Try talking about these comfortably at work somewhere. Try striking up a conversation about these in the grocery checkout line and see how it goes. Try it in an elevator when someone's stuck next to you. And when we get to church, sometimes it doesn't get much better. Spirituality, sometimes we do better talking about, but we don't want to offend anyone with how they do their spirituality. And sometimes we need to talk about spiritual things at church like it's in a vacuum, like it's separate from the world around us. That's the things we talk about here, but they stay here, right? Somehow we forget that spirituality is connected, not disconnected, but connected to finances and politics, ethics, self-care, our job, our family, our relationships, and yes, sex. It seems that sex is a scary word, even though our society is obsessed with it. Don't believe me? How many of you know who J-Lo is now officially dating based on Instagram? Yep. Back with Ben. Big turnaround. Poor A-Rod. He can't be America's darling anymore. We are obsessed. If you look at the number of shows based on dating alone, and they're all scantily clad along the way, you see our obsession with it. When you look at how we do advertising, we're obsessed with it, yet we get to church and go, no, we're not. We don't even want to talk about it. We'll keep our spirituality here and our sexual obsession out there. Have you heard the latest? Do you know who's sleeping with who? Have you seen their leaked pictures? The hypocrisy has always been there. It's not new. And Song of Solomon's always been in the Bible. It's not new. This passionate love poetry, had Ellie read the G-rated version. By the time you get to chapter 3 and 4, it starts to get a little more graphic. We get descriptions of body parts and other things that you wouldn't talk about in mixed company. It's clear this couple have a passionate relationship. How can we read such passionate poetry and then somehow pretend that spirituality and sexuality are not related? How can we read such sensual words, then shame people for feeling those emotions in their own life? Salt and Pepper may have said it best back in 1990. Let's talk about sex, baby. Let's talk about you and me. Let's talk about sex for now. To the people at home and in the crowd, it keeps coming up anyhow. Don't be coy, avoid, and make void the topic, because that ain't gonna stop it. Now, we talk about sex on the radio and video shows. Many will know anything goes. Let's tell it how it is, how it could be, how it was, and of course, how it should be. Now you'll have that earworm in your head for the rest of the day. Others of you are younger and going, Salt and Pepper, who's that? Don't worry, they're on YouTube. But at church in a broad sense, the only things we need to know about sex, if you listen to the church over the last 20 years and what gets said in public and what gets put on TV and what people say the church says, only things the church has said about sex is, one, don't have any, right? Don't have any. Second, don't think about any. Don't even think about it. If you think about it, you've already crossed the line. And if you do, you better produce children. And if you talk about it too much or think about it too much, well, you know, the whole hell thing. But what about the wisdom? What about the wisdom that could come to help people make better choices? Think about the scripture we heard today. Don't awaken love before it's ready. Don't awaken love before it's ready. That's really good advice from scripture. And if we were going to talk about sex at church, that would be good for people to hear. If we were going to talk about sex at church, that would be good for people to hear. Now, there are other lessons in Song of Solomon, too. Tradition credits Solomon, King Solomon, as the writer of this, and suggests that the love was the Queen of Sheba, an African dignitary, royalty from a country over in Africa who came over, and Solomon clearly is in love. According to scripture, Solomon actually gets fussed at, one, for having too many foreign wives. He had lots of them. And also for the hospitality he shows the Queen of Sheba. It seems he showed her everything. And I'm not just talking about his everything. I'm talking about the country's everything. Look at all we have in storage. Look at our wonderful military. Look at the codes to the bombs. Like, he's showing her all the Pentagon might have to offer. He's showing her Area 51. He's showing her all the secrets of the kingdom, showing off for this beautiful woman. And the country around him is going, oh no, they can invade us at any minute because now they know all our weaknesses. Besides the king's libido, she clearly knew that one before she showed up. The idea that their love affair might not have been true, we can't tell. The poetry seems very impassioned, very real, very sincere. Maybe it is a sincere relationship, but there's also something to be held in the tensions of these scriptures. The love poetry that Solomon writes and the questioning skepticism of the powers that be around him. There's something to be learned and remembered about how love changes our logic a little bit. How love sometimes has made some of us do dumb things. Anybody in that category? How love leads us to ignore dangers. Hot stove, I think I'll touch it anyway. Tempering passion with honest conversation. Talking about motives, power in relationships, past hurts. Balancing passion with the sharing of daily life and the relationship that's forged through going through hard stuff together. That would be really good advice for couples. For people in relationship. And if we were going to talk about sex at church, that would be a really good thing for people to hear. Too bad we don't do that, right? Here's another lesson about sex that I wish we could teach in church. Back in the old days, there was another step to a typical wedding. Now, those of you who've been to weddings lots probably know the basic outline is you have a wedding, you have a reception, and then there's a night of passion to follow. It's in every movie, right? That's the basic order of things. But there was an earlier time when there was a wedding and then a consummation of the wedding, still in the same building, while the relatives were all out in the reception area waiting to celebrate, assuming that the bride, and in this case it was always a bride and a groom, very heteronormative here, assuming the bride was pure, then they would come out and celebrate the wedding. And then there would be the awkward reality of a power imbalanced arranged marriage after they had already awkwardly consummated everything behind doors with Uncle Larry in the next room. It doesn't carry the same way as the modern rom-com comedy, right? Although I think that could open itself up to a great deal of comedy if we imagined it. But there was an idea that you spiritually celebrated something in the worship space and then you physically consummated it because there was something about spiritual and sexual, physical and spiritual that went together. That somehow by having intercourse with somebody, you were bound to them. You were bound to them in a way you couldn't explain. Whether it was for a lifetime of marriage or an arranged marriage that would last as long as you could stand it, or whether it was for a one-night stand. The idea is when you gave of your sexuality, you gave of your intimacy, you were literally giving something. You were bound and connected by that experience. You gave a piece of yourself in that, not just physical. There were lots of issues in that practice. The ways of judging a woman's purity and ignoring the man's, creating the pressure on a couple that just isn't necessary. The fact, again, that we're lacking consent in many arranged marriages, and even in an unarranged marriage, partners both have an opportunity to say when and where and how. Not in this tradition, but they got one thing right. The one thing they got right that we seem to forget is the connection between sex and spirituality. Sexuality and spirituality, they are connected to each other if we like it or not. There's a connection between sexuality and spirituality. And if we were going to talk about sex at church, which we know we can't, this would be a great jumping off point for conversations. Can you imagine taking this old ritual and talking about personal agency and mutual decision-making in relationships and how we share consent and articulate what we expect and need and want from each other as partners? Can you imagine the great conversation between same-sex couples on social expectations and the language that is traditionally bound in rituals that we sometimes impose on everyone? Can you imagine the great conversations on sexuality and spirituality and its impact on gender expression? Can you imagine the great conversations on consent in dating with young couples that we still haven't figured out? We could have conversation about the connection between sex and spirituality if we were going to talk about sex at church. One day, maybe we will. Amen.